Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on March 26th, 2025. If we do have any NLC webinar first timers in the room today, know that our Cathedra webinars get their word from the Greek word for learning, get their name from the Greek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about NAHASDA procurement and contract administration. This is the third day of a 5-day series. And your instructor is Cheryl A. Cosley, who is principal of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We appreciate that you joined us for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here, so just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Just so you know how to navigate on our new website, you will be able to find all the recordings from this week as well as all the PDFs of the slides here in the courses section. Or if you opt to maybe share it with a friend or a colleague later after the fact, they can find all that information in that area as well. You're also able to access all of our recorded webinars and the slides and all of that from any past webinars that we've done here on the platform. Now that you're on here, there's no need to re-register any further. Anytime we have a live webinar happening, you'll log into the platform and then you'll see a green banner at the top of your screen, just like you see now. It'll tell you a live webinar is happening, and you can just click on that green banner to enter, just like you did today. We do ask that you typically join with listen-only capabilities because it just helps us to not have any audio feedback for our instructor when people come in and out. If you've joined and you notice that your sound is not coming out of the speaker or device that you would prefer, you can click on the little telephone icon that's down at the bottom of your screen like you see here, and it'll bring up a list of your mic and your speaker devices, and you can choose the correct one that you want your sound coming from. We do have some ways to interact during today's webinar. We opt to mainly use the public chat, so we do encourage questions and comments. We ask that you send them there. If you are having any kind of tech support issues, you can let me know in the public chat as well, and I will do my best to help you navigate through it. I am pulling up right now a link to today's presentation slides. I apologize, I should have already had that in the chat. I didn't quite have that ready for you today, but I'm putting that in there right now. So if any of you have yet to access today's slides from the course section, the link for that is in the chat for you right now. And then when you do have a question or a comment, you'll just click into that box where it says send message to public chat, type in what you'd like to say or ask, and then you can hit your enter button, or you can click on the little paper airplane icon and that'll send it in. We would appreciate if you guys took a second to introduce yourselves in the chat. You could let us know your name, where you're tuning in from, your work or your role in Indian country that led you to today's webinar, and then your tribal affiliation if you have one. And just a final note before I hand it off to your instructor today, know that if you click on that red menu panel that's all the way to the left-hand side of your screen, it is going to pull you out of the webinar and it'll take you to whatever you've selected on that menu. But all you have to do is just click on the green banner once again, and you'll be brought right back into the webinar itself. All right, and while you folks are introducing yourselves in the public chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor for today, Cheryl Cosley. And Cheryl, I am making you presenter now.
Thank you very much. You can use that little green bar just like I had to twice this week so far. So let's hope the third time's a charm. Welcome to day 3, guys. Thanks for being with me so far. You learn a little bit different stuff every single day. There's a lot to procurement, as you could see. Again, this is courtesy of the Native Learning Center, the Office of Native American Programs. Welcome. Good afternoon. I just did smudge. We usually open up our, trainings and different things with prayer. So this webinar is also being recorded. My information is at the beginning and the end. Should you ever need me, you can always reach out and I'll try to get you an answer. I think all of you know who I am by now, but my name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I am Loon Clan, and I come from, in my language, Keno-Shinkoning, which means place of the pike. That's the Bay Mills Indian community. Our reservation is located at the top of Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, and our waters actually border Canada. We're a Ojibwe Chippewa people. I served as director of housing for my tribe for 28 years. During that time frame, I served as the chairperson of the Great Lakes Indian Association, Indian Housing Association. GLIHA is what we are called, and it is the 31 tribes in the Great Lakes, surrounding the Great Lakes. So I did that for 7 years, and I served on the board of the National American Indian Housing Council. I started off as a secretary, went to vice chair after a couple of years, and then eventually became a 2-time chairperson. So 16 years on that board. And then I decided to slow down, which never really happened. And I started Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates in March of 2019. And I've been providing training and technical assistance ever since, throughout, the lower 48 and Alaska. I work all over with, large size tribes, small tribes, rancherias, the villages up in Alaska, the pueblos. I work 2 pueblos right now, but so I'm all over. All of our needs are basically the same, but we're all from different places and different sizes. So, depending on the size of your organization, it depends on how much 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 people have to do. So as you can see in procurement, you're going to learn about some of those pitfalls also. This court structure is, the presentation, our participant materials. We've got examples, we've got references. So hopefully you're going to get something that you'll find useful for joining us for this whole week. As an objective, you as a NAHASDA recipient, hopefully will learn to effectively and efficiently conduct your housing procurement and comply with those requirements at 2 CFR 200. Other funding sources, if you're utilizing any other source of funding, you also have to follow all of their rules. When they compete, it becomes difficult. The rule of thumb is always follow the strictest set of rules. There's an understanding, hopefully, of TDHE management, operations in relation to procurement, who does what. Just as long as somebody's doing it. That's why, when it got to useful life and insurance, I put those in there, because a lot of times that falls under a procurement. Well, what triggers it is the procurement itself and the expenditure of NAHASDA funds. And if you're doing that, oftentimes your ED might not be thinking about things like that. So that's why I put that in, so you can make sure that your organization does things like that and covers that base, So this will hopefully give you that increased knowledge, those concepts and basics of procurement, and improve your capabilities, your proficiencies in your different job skills, and in the performance of your procurement functions at your housing entity. So you'll see me bounce back and forth. Some of it I write for a TDHE, some of it I'll write for a housing authority, because that's what we all started out was a housing authority. And now we even have departments. So, you interchange that. So this will cover those administrative requirements to pertain to procurement when we utilize those Indian Housing Block Grant funds under NAHASDA. You're going to hopefully learn to conduct that procurement effectively and efficiently, and to comply with the requirements imposed by HUD and your other funding sources. Discuss the skills required to perform the responsibilities related to our procurements and management, and complying with 2 CFR 200. As I confessed earlier in the week, 2 CFR 200 is my least favorite one of our guidance documents, because it wasn't written just specifically for housing. So it's not as easy for me to comprehend or know where to look for things, but I got better at it over the years. And hopefully, you guys are going to learn how to make sure that you utilize all those tools that they give us, and make sure you get to that Code Talk website. Okay. That's where you get copies of all of that stuff. So there's going to be procurement documents, hopefully, that will help your organization also. as I explained in the prior couple of days, if you could put your questions in the chat, I'll try to get to them when I, end the session. And if I can't answer it, I'll come back with a question or an answer. I keep a full screen so I don't see the chat box. So I apologize for that, but some of my documents like this one have a lot of information in it. So today we're going to go through that micro purchase method. Cash management, internal controls, small purchase method, competitive sealed method, solicitation of bids, wage rates for your construction contracts, and that competitive proposal method. Tomorrow we'll do the non-competitive, okay? Quotation evaluation, suspension and debarment. Got to make sure you check for that. Follow the Indian preference requirements, procurement principles and standards, your price and cost analysis, that useful life and binding commitments that I keep referring to. And then we'll finish up with contract administration, your environmental assessments and reviews. The difference between a subrecipient versus a contractor, you have to basically, there's little tests to figure out which you're dealing with. The procurement checklist for your files, procurement procedures, contract file arrangement, and utilizing those federal supply sources in procurement. Please utilize these reference materials, download them, put them in a file. They'll become helpful to you at one time, or make sure maybe you even print them and at least you'd know the numbers to go find them on Code Talk at a later time if you need them. E2 CFR Part 200 and your own procurement policies, you guys got to have. If you're in procurement, you should have copies of those, okay? NAHASDA statute, NAHASDA regulations, if you don't make a copy, at least familiarize yourself with those documents. That procurement glossary might be helpful to you if you haven't, been doing this a long time. And these other documents, check to see if your organization has them. Do you have an Indian preference determination letter? Do you have a qualification application? As you see in the next couple of days, you'll find out why you have to have that. The guidance documents on Indian preference and employment and contracting, and the federal micro purchase and SA threshold, the simplified acquisition threshold, that's explains where we're currently at and where you can go to if you meet certain criteria and your tribe decides to undertake that. The NAHASDA related procurement regulations, 2 CFR 200 transitional notice, the environmental review process, and there's a procurement checklist. Telephone solicitation, RFQ, RFP, RFP for a manufactured home or a modular home. There's a sample procurement policy, an example ethics policy. Always make sure your governing bodies and your staff working in procurement have signed something to that effect, and that you train them or that they are trained in recusal and their duties, okay? That procurement and post-award flow chart, your owner contractor construction agreement, sample procurement contract file arrangement could keep you out of trouble. If nothing else, use that as, your guidance document. And then that useful life that we were talking about. And the total development cost for NAHASDA. If you are supposed to track this. So you have to become familiar with this particular document and what goes into it, what doesn't, and how you utilize those documents and where you track it. We're only allowed to spend a certain amount of money on our units, okay? And then that code of conduct, it's a monitoring list, a small purchase checklist, your contracting planning, competitive sealed bidding checklist, that should be helpful. Davis, Bacon, that act, and the desk guide, your GSA federal supply sources, and the environmental review. That's a brand new document in the latter part of last month that will show you different areas under your environmental review that they've made a little bit easier. So under your micro purchase method, so on the Great Lakes, we have, unlike most places with big, long, sandy beaches, we have rocky beaches. And these are some of we walk on nothing but rock sometimes getting out there. But if you're a rock hunter, we have agates, we have all sorts of things. So it can be interesting. Beautiful, beautiful. So that micro purchase threshold, you can read about that at 2 CFR 267. Okay, it means, what is micro purchase? The purchase of supplies or services when you're using a simplified acquisition procedure, the aggregate amount of which does not exceed your micro purchase threshold. Okay, those procedures comprise a subset of your non-federal entity, of your tribes, of your housing entities, small purchase procedures. The non-federal entity uses procedures in order to expedite the completion of its lowest dollar small purchase transactions and minimize the associated administrative burden and cost. Your micro purchase threshold is set at the Federal Acquisition Regulation 48 CFR subpart 2.1. Okay, $10,000 currently. This threshold is periodically adjusted for inflation. Now, that guidance document I give you, your tribe or TDHE can establish a threshold higher than that micro purchase threshold of $10,000 by self-certifying a threshold amount up to $50,000 on an annual basis. So it's not a one and done. It's something that you're going to have to always pay attention to. Always make sure you get those dates to do that. Okay, you have to require or comply with all those requirements of that notice, which is PIH 2023-01. So a micro purchase, if price is considered reasonable, you don't have to do a competitive solicitation. The required, it is required if your price does not exceed, or I guess it isn't required if your price does not exceed $2,000. Okay, why that threshold? That's your Davis-Bacon threshold. Okay, you have to, anything, a contract over $2,000 when you're not using your own labor force, you know, from the tribe, from your housing entity, you have to tell whoever you're contracting with that you're subject to Davis-Bacon and pull down those wage rates. Okay, and then $10,000 for all procurement using federal funds or whatever is in your procurement policy. Your procurement policy could actually have a smaller threshold. And if it does, that's what you have to use. Okay. So those are your thresholds there. It applies to purchases below your established threshold when you have a reasonable cost available. That means you could buy 1,000 pencils as long as those 1,000 pencils aren't $10,000. That is not reasonable. Reasonable cost, because they're going to also look at that. Documented with an authorized purchase order or other formal method. Okay, you cannot, or your staff cannot, break those up. Okay, you can't bid split. Purchases cannot be broken into smaller transactions to meet that threshold. They will look at that. Okay, to meet your micro purchase threshold. To the extent practicable, your non-federal entity must distribute your micro purchase equitably among qualified suppliers. If you have 2 or 3 different sources to get lumber from, lumber yards or whatever, and they are relatively close in price, you don't give all your business to one person. You're supposed to share that among them all. That's just, you know, what they want. So that bid splitting, there's a prohibition. Your contracting officer or whoever is doing that shall not break down your requirements aggregating more than the small purchase threshold or your micro purchase threshold into multiple purchases less than your applicable threshold, whether it be your own or, you know, the published one. They call that bid splitting or unbundling, and it's totally illegal. Some people will try to do that to permit the use of a small purchase procedure and avoid the requirements that apply to purchases that exceed that particular threshold. Okay. Under your block grant program for procurements of goods and services valued less than $5,000, recipients can continue to operate under the existing statutory de minimis procurement exemption, which you can read about within the NAHASDA section or the NAHASDA statute at 203G. So micro purchases and de minimis exceptions are two different methods for simplifying your purchasing. Recipients can develop your procurement policies, okay, that choose between those two options for your purchases under $5,000. Tribal preference requirements will apply to all micro purchases regardless of the value, but will not apply to a de minimis procurement, okay? That's confusing language. Make sure that, you wrap your head around it, make sure that it's addressed in your policy, and then pick one or the other. So your de minimis exception for procurement of goods and services, notwithstanding any other provision of law, a recipient shall not be required to act in accordance with any otherwise applicable competitive procurement rule or procedure with respect to a procurement using a grant under this Act of goods and services, the value of which is less than $5,000. So that's exactly, if you went to the statute under G, that's the language that comes from that. That's what it tells you about de minimis exception. Okay, so they fought hard for that. Okay, card management and internal controls. A lot of misuse sometimes of petty cash and credit cards and things like that. You're procuring. Just because you're not putting out a contract, you are still procuring goods. You have to be careful. So petty cash funds are used for very small one-time purchases. If utilized, petty cash funds should be established in your procurement policy, should be sufficient to cover very small purchases over a reasonable time. So you write your rules for that particular policy. For instance, 1 month. It has to establish the overall amount, your starting amount for your fund, establish the maximum amount for each purchase utilizing petty cash, and either establish the appointment of one or more individual petty cash administrators or the procedures for appointing such individuals. Purchasing cards, including a debit or a credit card, are a payment method and not necessarily a method of procurement. Purchasing cards can be helpful reducing transaction cost. Purchasing card usage should follow the rules for your other small purchases. For example, your contracting officer can use a purchasing card for micro purchases without obtaining additional quotes, provided the price is considered reasonable. However, for amounts above your micro purchase level, your contracting officer would generally need to have obtained a reasonable number of quotes before purchasing via a purchase card. Okay, so the slide before this, when we were talking about petty cash, we had a petty cash fund. We utilized it because of our location, one of the reasons. Sometimes our guys had to go, and it was usually our maintenance staff, our carpenters, things like that, would have to go into the lower peninsula to go get lumber supplies or certain things that, because we're so limited up in that area, had to come from that area. And it cost money to get over the Mackinac Bridge into the lower peninsula. So we had a petty cash fund where we could take the money out for their bridge fare. That was, one of our examples for our petty cash purposes. It's for things that you just don't have time and you're not going to cut a check for like $4 or $4.50 each way, or, things like that. So make sure that even if you're using a card, you're following your procurement process and policy. So the cash management, your internal controls, when you're using a purchase card, your TDHE should adopt reasonable safeguards and procedures to ensure that they are only used for intended purposes. For instance, limiting the types of purchases or the amount of purchases that are permitted with credit cards. TDHEs should make sure that they have guidelines for selecting merchants, vendors, tracking purchases, card payments, and settlement procedures. You should have language and signed policies for people that you issue those cards to, that they have to turn them in if they, leave that position or if they're dismissed, that they're responsible for their purchases, that they could be disciplined and possibly dismissed if they use it wrong, that they're not allowed to purchase for themselves and pay it back. You should have a very good policy having to do with your credit cards, okay? And a lot of times it's with your procurement policy. Your purchase orders, they can be a mechanism to get your guys in trouble or your staff in trouble. You have to make sure only certain people can use them and that they're filled out completely. I call them my guys, my maintenance staff, my carpenters, whatever. They're my friends to this day, What is this? What did you buy? Oh, I can barely, and I have a bad signature. I can barely read the signature. I can't read the purchase order. You need to go back and fill that thing in correctly. What you're buying, who you're buying it for, all of that. Because it won't pass muster, and not only your auditors will look at that, but the monitoring will, that'll be revealed. Your work orders too. Show that you finished your work in your work orders. There's certain things that, they look for. If you charge a tenant saying that you did something, you got to prove that you did it and that you completed it and you replaced it. And, it's there. Purchase orders. You have to be able, who signed for this? Where are you buying it from? What was the date? How many did you buy? Things like that. So they're usually issued on a standard TDHE form. HUD doesn't prescribe any form for your purchase order. It'll generally contain information regarding the scope of work, the service to be provided, delivery, method of payment, inspection, acceptance. Additional terms and conditions can be added depending on the nature and the complexity of work that you're requesting on that purchase order. And there should be multiple copies of it. Most purchases under your small purchase method will be done via a purchase order sent or given to your contractor to initiate delivery of the items or performance of the services. The issuance of a purchase order by your TDHE and its acceptance by your contractor, either through performance of that work or a signature on that purchase order, they actually constitute a contract. That's why they have to be completed. It's crucial that purchase order clearly specify the item or service being purchased and the terms and conditions. This amount of lumber to be delivered within 5 business days. To be picked up within 5. How are you going to get it? All of that. It's got to be complete. So, receiving your goods, your services, approving payments. Okay, this was another area where I had a procurement officer. She would absolutely go bananas. You guys, I know that you needed that part, but you can't just walk in and take the whole box. I've got to have the slips on it. I've got to have the paperwork on that. So we had to have basically a meeting saying you guys just can't come and swipe your stuff. There's a certain procedure that you have to do, and if she's not here, it still has to take place. So make sure that you've got things, like that taken care of for receiving goods, services, approving payments. You should establish systems for ensuring your items required by a contractor received in accordance with those terms. Payments should also be processed promptly to allow for prompt payment discounts if you get those where applicable. And maintain those good relationships with your contractors. So, there's the Mackinac Bridge, and that's what it looks like right now. The ice cutter went through and it moved the ice, but sometimes it does that all by itself with a severe wind. and I can't get into the Lower Peninsula. So when I go home, I might not get across that bridge, depending on the amount of ice falling or the wind or things like that. But that's a real thing, so that's the bridge I was talking about, needing the money for out of the petty cash to get across, because they charge by axle. So your small purchase method, an optional method available when procurement is less than your simplified acquisition threshold, $250,000 or less, according to your policy. Your small purchase method can be used to procure office supplies, vehicles, rehabilitation contractors, professional services, equipment. Your principles of that method has to be competitive. Less formal can be done by phone, fax, email. You must be bidding apples to apples. Okay, that's small purchasing. You can apply it with other bids, quotes, proposals, requests for proposals. NAHASDA permits this method when the purchase is under $250,000. You can buy a lot of different things for under $250,000. So you need to establish that threshold within your procurement policy and follow it, especially if it's less than 250. You make sure everybody knows that they don't just say, oh, this says we can, do it up to this amount. So your key elements of your small purchase method, you don't have to publicly advertise. You need to have adequate number of qualified bidders or proposers. I always told my staff, adequate is 3 minimum. It kind of, 1 is definitely not it. 2, they would like you to get more. 3, they seem to be happy with, but that's what I always strive for, a minimum of 3. At a minimum, use a written checklist in your solicitation so each bidder has the same information. As I was talking about, I can't go try to buy a truck. I'd like a 4-wheel drive truck. Next person I talk to, I'd like a 4-wheel drive truck, but let's make it a Dodge. Third person, you throw in a plow package. You can't do that. They're not bidding apples to apples. It's got to be the same thing all the way across the board. If you should decide that you want to change it, you go back and you start over. I'm sorry, we've decided we're going to change that. We'd like to give you, or please give us another proposal. We'd now like, it to be a 4-wheel drive Dodge with a, plow package. Key elements, you can do it by phone, fax, website, email, in person. If the solicitation is conducted by phone, actually, no matter which way you conduct it, it has to be uniform and consistent for all your potential bidders. You cannot divide large contracts into small, multiple contracts. Any lack of competition requires HUD's written approval. You cannot sole source, okay? They do not like it. I've heard people say, well, we just called it an emergency. You better be able to prove that it's an emergency, getting, depending on what you are procuring there. They're very strict about that. If nothing else, you call and you get written proof that you've talked to HUD and they said, oh, okay, it's an emergency. You could actually lose all your water lines as well as not having any heat, things like that. Remember, it's under 24 CFR 1052, lack of competition, okay? So your solicitation itself, if price quotations are sought verbally, okay, your selection factors have to be provided to everybody you solicit. Requirements for service aggregating greater than 250,000 or whatever your threshold is, okay, must not be broken down into several purchases, okay, can't bid split, that are less than the limit merely to, permit contract award under your small purchasing method. If you have a recurring need for services or supplies and it's estimated to go under 250,000 or whatever your procurement level is for that, procedures should be used rather than small purchase procedures. Okay, you should be using sealed bid, competitive proposal because of that fact. In all cases, the price paid for small purchases have to be fair, have to be reasonable, and the most effective way of accomplishing this is to solicit competitive quotes. So a competitive quote can be solicited by telephone, letter, internet, and formal procedures provided. So the manner of solicitation provides for, as long as it provides for participation by that adequate number of competitive sources. Your competitive quotations should be solicited from an adequate number of qualified sources in order to promote competition to the maximum extent. Cool. So you get one, and then you get one and they say they don't want to bid on it. You know that I contacted this person and they, don't offer that material, or they can't get our product, or they don't want to bid at this time. You still need to go out and try to get a couple more, okay? Just because you get one that says no, that doesn't work. Because you might be going to a Ford dealership for a Dodge. Of course they're going to say no. They're going to look at that. So you need to solicit from an adequate number of qualified sources. That requirement is based on 2 CFR 200-319. So when I used to read these things, if I had any time, which a lot of times I don't, but I'm a speed reader, I would go to 319 and see what it was to make sure that I was doing it right. And oftentimes it would refer me to somewhere else. But that's how you learn what all those rules are. So your award, before awarding a small purchase, your price must be determined to be fair and reasonable. A reasonable price can be determined based on, catalog, internet, market prices, comparison with other items that you picked up, that you bid on, that you procured of, that same item. Your procurement file should document the basis for why you accepted that price. If available, copies of any commercial price list should also be kept for use by your procurement personnel. We used to take a picture of the website. This is the price that it offered us right now. If you ever need to document that, especially if you're using an iPhone, they have a date and a calendar on it. Sometimes you have to take a picture of two things, with the phone, the date, and then a picture of the screen. Okay. We use those for inspections too. It tells you at this date and time, this is what we got, whether it be damage or this is the price that was offered. And I did it again. Okay, guys. Yep. I got to go out. I clicked it. I didn't make it all the way through, my girl. She's in the background.
No worries. I'll make you presenter when you come back in.
Sorry.
Sorry, folks. We're all still getting used to the interface here on the new platform. Cheryl will be back in just a moment.
There we go. Thank you. So if your award is based on price, or your contract award is based on price alone, okay, not subject to negotiation, your contract should be awarded to your qualified Indian-owned vendor with the lowest quote, if it's reasonable, okay? If the procurement was not restricted to Indian-owned vendors, your contract should be awarded to the vendor with the lowest responsible quotation. Again, you got to deem it reasonable, okay? When or while you are implementing your Indian preference policy. There's a lot of areas where you can't get Indian preference, but you need to try. So if it's not based on price, if your award is to be based on factors other than price, you use what they call a competitive proposal method. You issue a request for proposal that includes evaluation criteria, okay? Rating points that you're going to use to evaluate the merits of each quote that you get. If your procurement is not restricted to Indian-owned vendors, a determined percentage of your total number of available rating points can be reserved for the provision of Indian preference. You need to document everything. Although your total dollars obligated by small purchases may be small in comparison with your formal contracts, your items bought using those procedures are often as important as your large contracts. Consequently, it's important to maintain proper records of your small purchases. A copy of your signed purchase order should be attached to all relevant documentation, such as your procurement request, basis for your price reasonableness, acknowledgement of receipt of goods and or services, and your payment authorizations. A blanket purchase agreement, a BPA. They're similar to a charge account, and they provide for monthly invoicing. They're established by negotiating agreements for discounted purchases with commonly used vendors. Okay, so I was working out at a housing authority in California, and I recommended this, because they were still a couple hours away from a great big town, but you're going to go in and you're going to buy appliances the majority of the time from this person. Why don't you go try to negotiate a blanket purchase? So your examples could be hardware, plumbing, electrical, gasoline, office supply. In order to avoid the appearance of sole source procurement, several each of those type of firms should be considered. So go to several vendors. Those purchase agreements should be solicited on a regular basis. You don't just give them a blanket purchase agreement for 5 years. You have to do it more often than that. Okay. The following steps are taken when you implement a blanket procedure, a blanket purchasing agreement. So your individuals that are authorized to purchase, the total dollar limit for each purchase are also specified in a letter to that firm. Such letters have to be updated as often as your personnel changes or other conditions require. Maybe you want to up it. Maybe you want to add certain other items to it. Person's no longer there. You don't want them to be able to stroll in and go, utilize that. Purchases are made either by calling your supplier to order your needed item or by visiting them. For each purchase, the supplier furnishes a delivery or a sales ticket describing the item and showing the cost, the date delivered, the name of the person who made that purchase. The tickets are accumulated until the end of the month and compared with a monthly invoice from the vendor. A check is issued for full payment on a monthly basis. Okay, we use this with one of our lumber suppliers, with more than one of them actually. And one of them also had a contract with the tribe, and he would come in, and multiple times I ended up saying, okay, I don't think we should utilize this guy anymore, because somebody else would come in and they said, are you from Bay Mills? And the guys would say, yeah. And they didn't mean Bay Mills Housing Authority. They meant Bay Mills Tribe. They work for the construction component of the tribe, or public works. We have several components that do that through the tribe. And we would get the bill for it. It's like, hey, we didn't purchase this. You have to do a little bit more than say, are you from Bay Mills? If you have 3 accounts for Bay Mills. So you have to be careful with that also. Our gas station, our tribal gas station, issued every single purchaser their own number, and it went to the license plate that you were actually gassing up. So things like that wouldn't happen. It does make it easier, but you still have to do your diligence that you're being charged for your housing entity's specific purchases. Okay. If your BPA is being used for repeated purchases of the same item totaling a significant dollar amount, consider awarding a formal contract for that particular item. Okay. So your simplified acquisition threshold at 288 means the dollar amount below which a non-federal entity, that's what we are, can purchase property or services using a small purchase method. You're going to adopt small purchase procedures in order to expedite your purchase of items costing less than whatever your established acquisition threshold is. It's set by the Federal Acquisition Regulation at 48 CFR subpart 2.1, and in accordance with 41 USC 1908. As of this date, it's $250,000, unless you go for and meet all of that other criteria, okay? And this threshold is periodically adjusted for inflation, and you'll see it published. That's why it's important to get on Code Talk and check to see all the program guidances and PIH guidances, are notices, or PIH and PIHN notices. Those of you that are new to this, okay, you need to get to the HUD website. Go to Code Talk is the easiest way to do that. But you go into the HUD website and make sure you're over on the Indian side. When it comes to notices, it has to say PIH or PIHN. That means public and Indian housing. That's what the IH is. That means it applies to us. Otherwise, if you don't see that IH in there, that's a public housing rule, and that's not necessarily ours, okay? So be careful there. So this is a small purchase checklist. Yes or no? Is your estimated cost, the requirement, below the established simplified acquisition threshold? If it's yes, you can use a purchase order. Are there available local vendors that can logistically satisfy your requirement? If the answer is no, consider additional lead time required to solicit vendors outside of your local area. May that requirement be satisfied by an existing blanket purchase agreement? If the answer is yes, use your BPA. If the answer is no, conduct a solicitation in accordance with your procedures. Has the requirement been split to below the mandatory purchase agreement monetary level? Order splitting, bid splitting, that's an unallowable practice. If it's reducing an order below your small purchase threshold to avoid a more complex procurement method. If the answer is yes, another method must be used, okay? So you should put those checklists in place, especially if you have various people doing this. If you have the same person who's been doing it for 20 years, they're not going to need that list. But if not, set up those procedures so you don't get in trouble. Now, your competitive sealed bid method is a different one. What is a sealed bid? Contractors submit their bid amounts, their quotes. They confirm compliance with all the specifications. Price is the sole factor, and it's a fixed amount. You award to you got to always, deem them responsive and responsible. And then the lowest bid. You apply any preferences that you have in place if it's feasible. Your Indian preference, So your competitive procurement is conducted by a sealed bid or competitive proposal when costs exceed your small purchase threshold. Both methods are equally effective. Sealed bidding is preferred in some circumstances. So your sealed bidding method should be used when you have a complete, adequate, realistic specification or purchase description available. You know that you're going to have 2 or more responsible bidders willing and able to completely, effectively, complete that work. The procurement lends itself to a firm, fixed price contract. The selection of your successful bidder can be principally on the basis of the price that they give you. Sealed bidding is our preferred method for construction procurement. Okay. This also gets into the discussion I had about everybody in your housing staff knowing what a sealed bid is and that they cannot open it. If one bid gets open, you've tainted your process and you've got to start the whole thing over again. Okay? They got to be dated, they got to be signed, and they have to be kept securely in a place. Just because you open all the mail doesn't mean you open the sealed bids. Got to be really careful that that doesn't happen. Okay? Sealed bidding will be used, for most construction and equipment contracts exceeding your small purchase limit. You can use them to procure materials, equipment, and your contractors, your building contractors. It should not be used for a professional service contract. They also call that bid letting, or an IFP, an invitation for bid, a solicitation of quotes. Specifications, invitations are very, very important, okay? Your specifications are hugely important. A lot of times you're going to use an architect or an engineer for this purpose. It is the preferred method for your conventional construction contracts, including the labor cost. Publicly advertise unless you're using small purchase or cooperative purchasing. Okay. You're advertising. Another good way is to work with your regional housing associations and see how they are doing that. We used to put these great big expensive things in the papers. Okay. Now people don't subscribe to papers the way that they used to. So you've got to find out what website, what publication, all of those things to get this down for your particular area. It is the most formal method of procurement that you will use. They're publicly solicited from an adequate number of bidders who are given adequate time to respond. Remember what I said? The more complex it is, the longer you give them. Those guys will come in a sealed bid. It's going to be a bid opening at 3:00. They'll come in at 2:56. They'll be with a pencil getting up-to-date prices right until that point. And if you don't give them adequate time, they won't give you the time of the day. They can't take that risk because they have to do it for whatever price they submit. You really got to be careful with this method. You give them adequate time. And you make sure that your bid opening is at a time that everybody can get there. I had an experience with that. One of my first ones, I think I had it at 3:30, and the buses school let out. And one of the contractors that we had invited to bid, we went through this big old long list, and there was one contractor on there that was doing significant work. This was a bigger project than I normally did, so I was really interested in getting a bigger firm. Got caught behind a school bus, and the bid opening was at 3:30, and he come cracking through the door like at 3:34, 3:35. I was not allowed to open the bid to see even what it was. I was not, you're not even supposed to accept the bid. You can take them and you can keep them there unopened. There's you got to be careful with that. So don't put your bid opening around whatever time your school buses are going to let out either. There's certain rules to doing this, okay? So your solicitation of bids, public notice has to be given for each procurement activity over that small purchase limitation. It's generally accomplished by advertising in a newspaper, general circulation, local newspaper, industry media, trade newsletters. It can be posted at your tribal business offices, housing offices, government offices. Generally, notice is required to be made public at least 10 days before the solicitation is issued. It's to allow prospective contractors enough time to decide whether they want to request a copy of the solicitation. Okay, so it's a notice of solicitation of bids. The Bay Mills Housing Authority will be taking bids on the construction of a 100-unit project. 3 to 4 bedroom units, roughly this in size. Solicitations will be, and you give the information. It should state at the minimum the place, the date, and the time of your bid opening or proposed due date. Okay, so they know I'm right in the middle of doing something. I don't know if I can get this done in 14 days and get that many prices together, Your solicitation number, your point of contact for questions or request for solicitations, and a brief description of the needed items. When appropriate, bidders may be required to pay a reasonable fee or deposit for a copy of that solicitation, such as for your construction contracts with voluminous blueprints. Okay. Whenever you're basically designing houses or apartment buildings or whatever, you've got big spec books, you've got blueprints, and they cost money. So you get a $25 or $50 deposit. They get that money back when they bring that back to you. And you never, ever, ever give out your last set under any circumstance. Okay? That's a rule of thumb. Mark them well. Come up with a good system somewhere in your procurement office or within your building. Your last set of blueprints should never, ever be allowed to leave a building either. Make sure that they are marked, identifiable, and come up with a good way to store these things. Because when you need an answer, when you need as-built, when you need specs, you need them quickly, usually. You can't go, the blueprint room's in there, and there'll be 1,000 documents, nothing in rolls, nothing labeled. You can't have that. That is another area where you need to be organized, okay? So when you go to prepare that solicitation, the solicitation of a sealed bid is accomplished by using a written evaluation for bids. All IFBs issued should be in a standard format with a table of contents, references where certain sections are located in the solicitation. Your IFB can incorporate documents by references, provided that it explains where they can be obtained. Your invitation for bids can be similar to what I am going to outline. A cover letter containing a cover letter explaining in a few sentences the basic work that is going to be required. It can be useful to point out any bonding requirements. Your face page, basic information about the IFP, including the bid opening time, point of contact, address for submission of bids, prices sheet, blank format bidders insert their prices into. It can include a primary line, sub-line items. The type of contract should also be stated. It's going to be a firm fixed price, or whatever you're going to use. That's the most common. Specifications, statement of work, that SAL, attach your specifications developed for that particular procurement. You're going to have mandatory clauses, contract provisions, okay? Everything included at 200-326, include all the clauses mandated by 2 CFR 200 Appendix 2. Include any additional clauses or contract terms and conditions applicable to that specific procurement. Delivery, performance schedules, special inspections, acceptance requirements, the time for performance of the required work along with the bonding requirements should also be stated in that section. The minimum amount of time bidders are required to hold their bids open. This bid will be good for 14 days or 30 days, has to be established and described within that document. Your invitation for bid can be similar. Instructions to bidders or offers, use the HUD form 5369 or B, 5369 for non-construction, B. It's an excellent source to refer to because the forms explain how those bids should be prepared, how they'll be handled upon receipt. Your instructions should indicate whether list of qualified Indian-owned economic enterprises or organizations are maintained. This section should also include any requirements for bid samples, descriptive literature. The method of award has to be clearly described in that information for your bidders. If optional items are going to be considered in the evaluation for the award, they have to be advised in your IFB. Any attachments can be included, such as wage determination that you're going to have to use. You have to tell them Davis-Bacon. You got to pay Davis-Bacon. They have to know that up front. There's, several parts to that mechanism there. Always, unless you've been doing it for a long time, architects, engineers, they're worth their weight in gold to make it go smoothly, so you don't forget things, so you don't inadvertently make a mistake. So your wage rates for your construction contracts, okay? We have to comply with Section 104 of NAHASDA labor standards. Any contract agreement for assistant sale or lease under the Act contain provisions requiring that not less than the prevailing wage rate in your locality as determined by state, tribal, and local law, the Secretary of HUD will determine needs to be paid to all your architects, to your technical engineers, to your draftsmen, technicians employed in the development, maintenance laborers, mechanics employed in that operation of your affordable housing project. Has to contain that provision then not less than the wages in your prevailing locality predetermined by the Secretary of Labor shall be paid to all of your laborers, your mechanics. It's basically all of your tradespeople. They've even made rulings on your flagmen. It's on the site of work. So the rules for your truck drivers are different. They receive Davis-Bacon, but it's only when they're on the site of work, not when they're at the pit. It's when they, enter that particular place. There's all sorts of things that you have to make sure that you adhere to, that you go do those interviews, or that those interviews are being conducted to make sure that they are getting the Davis-Bacon wage rate. Okay. So, you have to make sure that they have to pay Davis-Bacon. So paragraph 1, your provisions relating to wages, any contract or agreement for assistant sale lease pursuant to the Act shall not apply to any individual who receives no compensation or is paid expenses, reasonable benefits, nominal fee to perform the services for which the individual volunteered, is not otherwise employed at any time in construction work. So there's a couple exceptions there. Very, very few. You might have a contractor try to tell you that they're using an apprentice, and the apprentice therefore does not need to receive Davis-Bacon. Well, it goes a little further than that. If it's an apprentice, the only way that that it's got to be an apprentice under a Department of Labor approved, training. So there's real, when in doubt, you can always call the Department of Labor. They are happy to give you trainings. You have to be careful there, So, let me see how many. I don't know if I have time to tell you this story or not. I actually had a couple of guys. We tracked it. I used to provide them spiral notebooks, something like this in a notebook form. And my maintenance guys used to have to, when they plowed, when they salted, when they did certain things, to prove that we did that in the weather that we're in. So we always had a box of them sitting there. Same thing with the contractors. It got to the point where we would have tribal people as contractors. Here, we're going to put this out, but I would like you to get a couple, of our tribal people hired. I'd like to see a couple of them become certified carpenters, whatever. So we used to tell them, when you go on a Davis-Bacon site, you mark down when you went on, when you came off, and what you were doing for that day. I had a couple of them walk in the door one day and they said, "Hey, Cheryl, we got to ask you something about Davis-Bacon." And I said, "I don't have a project going on right now. What's going on?" And they said, No, it's not you. Another contractor we're working for, and it's supposed to be Davis-Bacon, and we're not getting paid those wages. So had a contact at Department of Labor, because they provided Great Lakes with training all the time. Those guys had those notebooks and they had when they went on, when they came off, what they were doing, and they won their thing. I was very proud that that happened, you know. So when you work with those, your tribal members are doing that, and they explain to them what Davis-Bacon is, have them track their time. But you're supposed to also go out in the field and have somebody that does that on your behalf. You have to do interviews, okay? So there's rules that go with those labor requirements, okay? So paragraph 1 shall not apply to any contract or agreement for assistance, sale, or lease pursuant to the Act if that contract or agreement is otherwise covered by one or more laws or regulations adopted by the tribe that requires the payment of not less than a prevailing wage as determined by the Indian tribe. So that is by the NAHASDA statute. I have that in your reference materials. Should you want to not pay Davis-Bacon, your tribe can set a prevailing wage rate. Okay, separate rules for that. It's not a one and done. You have to define prevailing, and it only applies to NAHASDA contracts. Okay, it won't work for your building of a casino or something else. It's for your NAHASDA contracts, but there is a way, there is a mechanism that if you don't want to pay Davis-Bacon, you can use a tribally determined wage rate. And those materials are also in those reference materials for you. Okay. Anything over 2,000, you got to start doing this though. So federal program legislation, all prime construction contracts in excess of 2,000 have to include provisions for compliance with Davis-Bacon. Okay. And they have to be paid once a week. They can't be paid bi-weekly. So there's bonding requirements that we have to follow. It's a consideration when you enter into a contract. If your contractor fails to perform, you need to leverage, or you need leverage to compel that contractor to address their non-performance. The other one is their retainage. Do not ever, because they will come in at the end of the job and say, or close to the end, we're almost done, can we have all of our retainage? And the answer is no. They will not come back at the time of your punch list. Always kept 10%. Maybe that was mean, but they always came back. You know, if you don't have enough to make them mobilize and they're on a different job, they're not going to care. Always make sure you have that adequate retainage also. Okay. So the bonding is the other component that protects you. If your contractor fails to perform satisfactorily, you need that leverage to get them to address their non-performance. As a last resort, you may have to use their bond to recapture any expenses you incur because of their non-performance. There's different forms of surety as described in the regulations. There's a number of ways that a contractor can meet those bonding requirements, or with HUD approval, you can adopt your own bonding requirements. Okay, read about that at 200-325. Construction facility improvement contracts, subcontracts exceeding your simplified acquisition threshold. Your federal awarding agency, pass-through entity can accept the bonding requirement or may accept the bonding policy and requirements of your non-federal entity, provided that the federal awarding agency or pass-through entity has made a determination that the federal interest is adequately protected. If such a determination has not been made, the minimum requirements have to be followed. So you're going to need a bid guarantee from each bidder equivalent to 5% of the bid price. Your bid guarantee has to be consistent of a firm commitment, such as a bid bond, a certified check, other negotiable instruments accompanying a bid, as assurance that that bidder will, upon acceptance of the bid, execute such contractual documents as may be required within that time specified. Look those over, have your architect, your engineer, or whatever, look at those documents also. Early in, I had somebody try to give me a fake bid bond. Okay. Tribe never used them again. It cost them millions over the course of years. People will try something, especially if you're doing that and you're a woman and they think you don't know anything about it. Okay. That's where that paid architect engineer, is worth their weight in gold. That performance bond on the part of the contractor, they can use 100% of the contract price. A performance bond is executed in connection with your contract to secure fulfillment of all of that contractor's obligations under such contract. A payment bond on the part of your contractor for 100% of the contract price. A payment bond is one executed in connection with the contract to assure payment as required by law of all persons supplying labor, materials in the execution of the work provided in the contract. So 24 CFR 1026 talks to that. Additional options can be used as acceptable methods to provide performance and payment assurance. The administrative requirements under NAHASDA, Section 200-325, bonding requirements apply. There can be circumstances under which the bonding requirements at 325 are inconsistent with other responsibilities and obligations of the recipient. In such circumstances, acceptable methods to provide performance and payment assurance may include a deposit with the receipt of a cash escrow of not less than 20% of the total contract price, subject to reduction during the warranty period, commensurate with potential risk. A letter of credit for 25% of the total contract price, unconditionally payable upon demand of the recipient, subject to reduction during any warranty period, commensurate with potential risk. Letter of credit for 10% of the total contract price, unconditionally payable upon demand of the recipient, subject to reduction during any warranty period, commensurate with potential risk. Compliance with the procedures for monitoring of disbursements by the contractor. After award of the contract, your successful bidder should furnish the surety for the construction project. It is likely that the cost of this bonding is going to be included in your contract price paid by your TDH year. So you're going to pay for it either way, but you're protecting your money. Okay. So if you should need to amend your solicitation, if a change to your IFB becomes necessary after you've issued it, that change has to be formalized by issuing a written amendment, sometimes referred to as an addendum. A copy of the amendment has to be mailed to each prospective bidder who was sent your basic IFB, along with required acknowledgement saying that they received it. If an amendment needs to be issued within 7 days before your scheduled bid opening date, your bid opening should be postponed long enough to permit your potential bidder to fully analyze and change and, submit that timely bid. A pre-bid conference. After your IFB is issued and before bids are due, the contracting officer may hold a pre-bid conference with prospective bidders to discuss your invitation for bid. A pre-bid conference is normally conducted only for large or complex procurement. Notice the conference has to be included in your IFB. The timing of the conference should allow bidders enough time to review that IFP, revise their bids before the bid opening. At the conference, your contracting officer should state that nothing at the conference will change the terms of the IFB unless a subsequent amendment is issued. A summary or transcript of that conference should be sent to all of those on the solicitation mailing list, not just those who attended. So I required bidders to attend a pre-bid conference for one of the projects that I did. It was a 15-unit R2000 building system that was utilized from Alaska in Michigan. But we used, and they built an airtight house. Okay, so there's ups and downs to those. You have to have ventilation systems. You can't puncture, that. So they had to know what they were. There was a different mechanism of building than what some of them were used to. So they were required to attend that pre-bid conference before they submitted a bid because it was a different mechanism of building. Okay. And then we had people there to instruct them and tell them exactly what they would need to do. So Restricted solicitations. Your IFB can be restricted to qualified Indian-owned vendors. It should not be so restrictive unless you have a reasonable expectation that the required minimum number of qualified Indian-owned vendors are likely to submit bids. Okay, that's iffy business doing a restricted solicitation, because if you don't get enough, you got to go out and bid the whole thing again anyway. The procedures at 1052, your applicable procurement policy must be followed in deciding whether to restrict solicitations to qualified Indian-owned economic enterprises and Indian-owned organizations. 24 CFR 1052, what tribal or Indian preference requirements apply to procurement? And it's about 1.5 pages long. Okay. So your bid opening should be similar to the following outline. Should be date stamped upon receipt, secured in a lockbox, cabinet, safe until the time of that appointed bid opening. That's why I said your staff have to know how to treat these documents. Each bid should be date stamped upon receipt, secured in that box. Sealed bids must be opened on your scheduled date and time shown on your solicitation. During your bid opening, the bid and each bidder's name and bid price is read out loud. The bidder's name and bid price has to be recorded and made available for public inspection. It has to be also that record placed in your procurement file. No commitment can be made to any bidder at a bid opening. Okay, the apparent low bidder is some of the verbiage used. Any question or disagreements should not be considered at the bid opening. A bid received after the time specified for that bid opening may not be opened. Okay, that's what I was telling you about the one after the bus. Has to be recorded as a late bid and retained unopened in your contract file. After your contracting officer evaluates each timely bid, the responsive and responsible bidder, you got to make that, deem them that way at first, that submits your lowest bid and meets all of your specified requirements are normally awarded that contract. You have to determine the responsiveness. First step of the contract award process is to review the low bid for responsiveness. A bid cannot be considered for award if it is not responsive to the essential requirements in that solicitation. A determination that that particular bidder is non-responsive should be documented in the contract file. Determining that price reasonability. Prior to the award of any contract, your contracting officer has to determine in writing that the prices to be paid are reasonable. Prior to awarding any contract, the contracting officer has to determine in writing that that contractor is responsible to perform that contract. In determining that responsibility, your contracting officer should consider all of the factors described at 2 CFR Part 200. Now, a rejection of bid. Rejection of any bid during your evaluation process has to be fully documented. All reasons for the rejection stated. Any bid can be rejected if the contracting officer determines in writing that it is unreasonable as to price. Unreasonableness of price includes not only the total price of the bid, but the prices for individual items as well. You might have one category that's way out of whack, might be way under. Okay, discounts. If it is specified in your IFB, factors such as discounts, transportation, life cycle cost must be considered in determining which bid is the lowest. Prompt payment discounts should ordinarily not be used to determine your low bid because there is no guarantee that such discount will be taken. Your firm bid rule. Under your firm bid rule, one of your principles that sealed bidding is based upon, the bidder is legally bound by the bid as submitted after the bids have been opened. The only exception to this rule is if there is an obvious mistake in the bid, such as a misplaced decimal. Equal bids. In the event that you have 2 or more bids equal in all respects, the award should be decided by drawing lots or other random means of selection. However, in the event of in the event of a tie bid, your contracting officer can give preference for small or minority businesses and award based on low bidder status, consistent with your state, local, and tribal law. This option is permissible provided that this condition is disclosed in the solicitation itself. In the event of a tie, award and contract for competitive sealed bids only to responsive and responsible bidders, reasonable price. They may not be the lowest bidder. You use appropriate contract forms and methods after obtaining legal advice. Okay, you got to have them involved, especially when you're talking, hundreds of thousands or $1 million or whatever. So this is a competitive sealed bidding checklist. Yes and no. Is it possible to describe the requirement in exact terms, design specifications, so the contractor can fix price the bid? Yes or no. If the contractor must provide a deliverable for a fixed price where unknowns are involved, contingency dollars usually are included within that price. Then, if these contingencies do not generate or occur, the material service may be overpriced. If the answer is yes, an invitation for bid utilizing competitive sealed bidding procedures may be effectively used and the award made to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Can it be expected that advertising will result in 2 or more responses to this solicitation? If the answer is yes, consider using an invitation for bid. So a sealed bid pre-qualification, try to pre-qualify contractors for Indian preference. Your data must be maintained, periodically updated to reflect changes. Check your list of debarred and suspended contractors, sam.gov. Anybody that's going to bid, make sure they're not on that list. Sealed bids. For construction, use a project manual, front-end documents, invitations, bid forms, special conditions, contract forms, general conditions, your technical specifications, your plans, and your drawings. Your invitation for bids, your solicitation can be publicly advertised. You can also personally solicit. Just like I said, I saw somebody that I really wanted to work with that had been doing work in the area, and it was finally a big enough job. Seek as many bidders as you can. That's huge. You can get a better price. You can amend or cancel by addendum, and you can limit to a list of pre-qualified bidders. Opening those bids only at a designated time and place, sealed and open publicly. It's a more formal process for construction projects. You read the bid amounts out loud. You hold all bids under advisement. You give no decision at that bid opening, and you can extend opening by addendum. Remember, always you have to deem them both responsive and responsible. Responsive, a bidder, proposal, vendor responding to a solicitation that provides all of the documents and the information required by you as a recipient. Responsible, bidder, proposer, or vendor that has the capacity and capability to perform the work and provide the goods properly and on time. This is an area that you will make that determination. You could be building 10 or 15 unit projects and have a contractor that you have used that does wonderful things. They're on time, but now you're bidding one for 100 units. The chances that they can bid on that and be found responsible is going to be rare. They might not have the banking and the financial ability. They might not have the size of the workforce. They might not have, a lot of the requirements, the tools to build to your size and timeline to go from a small project to a great big one like that. So that's what you'll run into a lot. So your competitive proposals method, that's Canada. That's what it looks like when it's frozen. The primary alternative to using sealed bidding for contracts above your small purchase threshold is a competitive proposal, that method of procurement. The chief advantage to that approach is that it allows for you to hold discussions with each offerer to ensure that they have a complete understanding of what work you want them to undertake. Your competitive proposals technique is considerably more complex than a sealed bid and requires the ability to devote staff and resources to the evaluation of those proposals. Submitted by your offerers, they're kept in confidence, not released to anyone who has not been granted access by your contracting officer. The primary difference between that sealed bid and competitive proposal is the finality of those initial offers. Under competitive proposals, alterations in prices may be made after your proposals are opened. Such changes are not allowed in sealed bidding. Under your competitive proposal method, an offer may be withdrawn at any time before award and discussions with your competing officers, and changes in their proposals, including price, are actually allowed. Professional services, cost reimbursement contracts will usually be handled using competitive proposals, as they will not be awarded based solely on the lowest price or cost. Your procurement file should indicate the reason for choosing competitive proposals rather than using a sealed bid procedure. Your competitive proposals include a list of evaluation factors, their relative importance. You should have a scale. They're used to procure goods and services when price is not your only factor. The solicitation is the request for proposal. Your competitive proposals can be used to procure, for example, your architecture accountants, your attorneys, your developers, utilize or buy computer systems, consultants, or banking services. Competitive proposals, your specifications might not be fully prescribed. Turnkey development or construction, the acquisition of pre-built housing. I described on day one what turnkey was. You're going to say, I want 10 3-bedroom units built upon this footprint that are 1,600 square feet. And that's what they bid on. And when they're done, they hand you the key. You don't have any, nothing in there. No further, basic duties. They just hand it to you when it's done. A competitive proposal, you're comparing Jonathan apples to Macintosh apples, not Jonathan to Jonathan. Okay? What is the best thing you can do for me? Your computer guys might say, well, we'll give you 10 Dell computers with 27-inch screens, and we'll throw in printers, and that's basically, it's going to be different. Your price is not your only factor. We'll come in and train them, and we'll give you free, virus protection for a year. So NAHASDA allows price not to be a factor in certain architect and engineering contracts also, which you can read about it, 2 CFR 200-320 2.4. Your non-federal entity can use competitive proposal procedures, qualifications-based procurement on architectural and engineering professional services, whereby the offerer's qualifications are evaluated and the most qualified offerer is selected, subject to negotiation of fair and reasonable compensation. This method, where price is not used as a selection factor, can be used in procurement of A&E professional services. It cannot be used to purchase other types of services through the A&E firms that are a potential source to perform the proposed effort. Okay. His experience, he's built for an Indian housing. He's got references from 15 different TDHEs throughout your region. That might be the one that you want to use, because then they'd be, familiar with NAHASDA. They would be familiar with HUD. They would be familiar with Davis-Bacon. You don't want to use, the first one I ever used came from the public housing sector. And the first houses I ever built looked like it. I hate to say that. The carpet wasn't, the nicest. They looked like little boxes. Then I found out what model it was. You learn by your mistakes. Your solicitation and proposals, advertised publicly, commonly fewer specifications, often but not always includes a contract form. Your selection criteria with the point scale incorporate your applicable preferences. That point system, everything except certain preferences, has a range of possible points. You use, remember that, panel of your knowledgeable evaluators. If you do a lot of building, they're worth their weight in gold. Individual and independent evaluations are recommended. Verify and evaluate those preferences. This is the sample criteria with the point scale, okay? Knowledge and experience of financial and accounting standards for Indian housing programs. Not somebody that just audits public housing. Our rules are totally different, including but not limited to 24 CFR 1026, 2 CFR Part 200. Accounting for program income under NAHASDA. Generally accepted government accounting practices. We have to use GAAP. Yeah, we can give them up to 25 points. Prior experience in Indian housing programs, you can up to 20 points. Evaluation of performance by existing and formal clients, including evaluation from advertising TDHE if applicant has previously worked with TDHEs, up to 15. Fees charged, including both the rates charged, the efficiency of the accountant or firm based on prior experience. Evaluation of Indian preference in training, employment, and contracting, up to 10. Indian preference for Indian-owned firms, 0 to 15, maximum of 100 points. So when you open and you evaluate those proposals, it's best to open them all at the same time. You are not required to do a public opening. You assess each proposal individually, determine who's responsible, who's responsive, and evaluate often using a point scale. And sorry, I'm running you guys a little bit late. Your proposal received should be dated and time-stamped, held unopened in a secure place until your established due date. Proposals should not be open publicly. After the closing date, your proposals received should be shown only to your TDHE and tribe personnel who has been authorized as having a legitimate interest in them. Information in the proposal should not be released to anybody who has not been authorized by your contracting officer. For the purpose of conducting negotiations, proposals should initially be classified as acceptable, potentially acceptable, or having a reasonable chance of being selected for award, or unacceptable. This decision should be made after your evaluation of both the technical and cost price proposals so that each proposal is examined in its entirety and the relative rankings of each of your offerers are compared. Offerers determined by your contracting officer to be acceptable or potentially acceptable are considered to be within your competitive range and have a reasonable chance of receiving a contract award. This decision should again be in writing and included in your procurement file. You guys gotta basically document everything and don't rely on your memory to do that. Keep them all together, keep really good notes. If you can't do it at that moment, put them in a stack and make sure somebody does that, okay? Offerers whose proposals are unacceptable should be notified promptly. Got to do that too. Promptly, make sure that's in your procurement policy, what promptly is, okay? It's got to be in several parts of your policy because you have to notify people when you do, you don't let them into housing. You don't accept their application. And you should always, when you're writing policy, business or calendar, okay? And be consistent. And when it says days, you give that definition in there, what it is. Recommended business days, okay? We will notify you within 10 business days. That way, if that happens right in the middle between Christmas and New Year's, you're going to have time to do that, okay? Offerers whose proposals are unacceptable shall be notified promptly with the appropriate rationale for such action and excluded from the remainder of that procurement. Written plan for evaluating your technical and cost proposals shall be established and evaluation panel members designated before that RFP is issued. Failure to make this action prior to the solicitation could give the appearance of favoritism toward one or more contractors. A specific evaluation plan must be developed for every competition. Normally, your cost and price evaluation is going to be handled exclusively by your contracting officer. Your technical evaluation requires a detailed evaluation plan, including a rating sheet for each offerer, listing each of the evaluation criteria, the weight assigned. The rating description should be clearly stated. For example, a rating of excellent means 20 out of 20 available points for a particular evaluation factor. Good means 15 to 20. The technical evaluator should assign both numerical ratings and narrative justifications to support the ratings that they give. That award of that contract is to, again, responsive and responsible proposers with the highest number of points whose proposal is most advantageous to you as a recipient based on price and the criteria published within your solicitation. The award and contract only to a responsive and responsible bidder. A reasonable price may not be your lowest bidder. You use your appropriate contract forms and methods after obtaining legal advice. Competition, contractors who are involved in any part of drafting your specs, your statement of work, making your RFP, your IFBs have to be excluded. No overly restrictive requirements are allowed. No state, local, or tribal geographic preferences unless mandated or encouraged by statute. Written procedures are required, and pre-qualified lists have to be kept current. You can't use a list that's 10 years old, okay? You have to find out if they're even in business. Done for the day. Sorry I left you 6 minutes late. And thank you guys for being here. If you guys have questions, I'll try to get them. Okay, make sure you get to her feedback. And Brooke, it's you.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Day 3 of 5. We are almost there. Another incredible presentation. Let me go ahead and take presenter back so I can close out. Folks, I'm going to keep it open. So if you do have any questions for Cheryl, feel free to send them into the chat. We do hope you can take a minute or two to complete the webinar feedback survey. It's completely anonymous. You can be as candid as you would like, and it helps us at the Native Learning Center to know what's working, what's not, and we share the feedback with our instructors as well. So it helps everybody to improve for you, our audience. We hope you can join us for day 4 of 5. That's going to be tomorrow, same time, same place. So 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. That'll be day 4 of 5. So we still have one tomorrow and one on Friday as well before we wrap this incredible series. You can check out the recordings. They are on our YouTube channel in a playlist called the Cathedra Webinars Archive. I'm going to put that into the chat as well. The recordings aren't able to be posted until the following day, but I have been posting them the next morning. So if you want to share the information with a friend or a colleague or a family member, those are available to you as well. And a lot of our other recorded webinars for about the past 2 years can be found on that archive playlist. Feel free to check out our upcoming training events. We post about them on all our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And if you are a podcast listener, we have an in-house produced podcast, the Hopathanga Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're somebody who likes to actually watch the interviews with our special guests, we post those videos to our YouTube as well. All right, folks. I know we're already running a little bit over. No worries there. You have that webinar feedback survey link in the chat, as well as the link to access the webinars archive on YouTube. I'm going to go ahead and leave it open for people to access the link a little bit later if they've walked away, but I am going to go ahead and stop the recording now.